Hey everyone, it's me, and I'm here to talk to you guys about a little book called The Grapes of Wrath. Oh my goodness, what will we be talking about today? Well, this is not actually about the entire book, but about one particular chapter. Chapter 17 in The Grapes of Wrath. So, if you are a person who has the Follett-bound Platinum version of this book, this chapter begins on page 193, but I have a PDF version here pulled up, and essentially, I just want to talk to y'all about this chapter a little bit, and, I'm just going to read through it. I'm going to try my best with some southern accents. Yeah, I am not known for my southern accenting, but I'll do my darndest. Anyways, this book is structured in the format of having a main story that follows a family, the Jode family, and interspersed between these chapters are vignettes of different experiences that people have been having during this time period, aka the Dust Bowl, aka around the Great Depression, and they're kind of just like snapshots into what other people are feeling during this time, and showing that this main Jode family that we're following, they're not alone in their struggle. The struggle is shared by thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are trying to live the same kind of way and are struggling in the same kinds of ways as well. So in chapter 17, I just really wanted to highlight how much I enjoyed this chapter. I had a very visceral reaction when reading this chapter. I was like, wow, you can imagine how comical it was. I dropped my book, jaw drops, oh my god, my hand goes onto my head. No way. What an incredible, wow, amazing chapter. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but this is an interesting chapter, and I wanted to read through it, just to refresh everybody and talk about it a little bit. So, the cars of the migrant people crawled out of the side roads. Okay, maybe I'll highlight as we go. The cars of the migrant people crawled out of the side roads onto the great cross-country highway, and they took the migrant way to the west. In the daylight, they scuttled like bugs to the westward, and as the dark caught them, they clustered like bugs near to shelter and to water. And because they were lonely and perplexed, because they had all come from a place of sadness and worry and defeat, and because they were all going to a new mysterious place, they huddled together. They talked together. They shared their lives, their food, and the things they hoped for in the new country. Thus, it might be that one family camped near a spring, and another camped for the spring and for company, and a third because two families had pioneered the place and found it good. And when the sun went down, perhaps 20 families and 20 cars were there. In the evening, a strange thing happened. The 20 families became one family. The children were the children of all. The loss of home became one loss, and the golden time in the West was one dream. And it might be that a sick child threw despair into the hearts of 20 families, of 100 people, that a birth there in a tent kept 100 people quiet and awestruck through the night, and filled 100 people with the birth joy in the morning. A family which the night before had been lost and fearful might search its goods to find a present for a new baby. In the evening, sitting about the fires, the 20 were one. They grew to be units of the camps, units of the evenings and the nights, a guitar unwrapped from a blanket and tuned, and the songs, which were all of the people, were sung in the nights. Men sang the words, and women hummed the tunes. Every night, a world created, complete with furniture, friends made and enemies established, a world complete with braggarts and with cowards, with quiet men, with humble men, with kindly men. Every night, relationships that make a world established, and every morning, the world torn down like a circus. At first, the families were timid in the building and tumbling worlds, but gradually the technique of building worlds became their technique. Then leaders emerged, then laws were made, then codes came into being. And as the worlds moved westwards, they were more complete and better furnished, for their builders were more experienced in building them. The families learned what rights must be observed: the right of privacy in the tent, the right to keep the past black hidden in the heart, the right to talk and to listen, the right to refuse help or to accept, to offer help or to decline it, the right of son to court and daughter to be courted, the right of the hungry to be fed, the rights of the pregnant and the sick to transcend all other rights. And the families learned, although no one told them, what rights are monstrous and must be destroyed. The right to intrude upon privacy, the right to be noisy while the camp slept, the right of seduction or rape, the right of adultery and theft and murder. These rights were crushed because the little worlds could not exist for even a night with such rights alive. And as the worlds moved westward, rules became laws, although no one told the families. It is unlawful to foul near the camp. It is unlawful in any way to foul the drinking water. It is unlawful to eat good, rich food near one who is hungry, unless he is asked to share. And with the laws, the punishments, and there were only two, a quick and murderous fight or ostracism, and ostracism was the worst. For if one broke the laws, his name and face went with him, and he had no place in any world, no matter where created. In the worlds, social conduct became fixed and rigid, so that a man must say "good morning" when asked for it, so that a man might have a willing girl if he stayed with her, or if he fathered her children and protected them. But a man might not have one girl one night and another the next, for this would endanger the worlds. The families moved westward, and the technique of building the worlds improved so that the people could be safe in their worlds, and the form was so fixed that a family acting in the rules knew it was safe in the rules. There grew up government in the worlds with leaders, with elders. A man who was wise found that his wisdom was needed in every camp. A man who was a fool could not change his folly with his world. And a kind of insurance developed in those nights. A man with food fed a hungry man, and thus insured himself against hunger. And when a baby died, a pile of silver coins grew at the door flap, for a baby must be well buried, since it has had nothing else of life. An old man may be left in the potter's field, but not a baby. A certain physical pattern is needed for the building of a world. Water, a riverbank, a stream, a spring, or even a faucet unguarded. And there is needed enough flat land to pitch the tents, a little brush or wood to build the fires. If there is a garbage dump not too far off, all the better, for there can be found equipment, stovetops, a curved fender to shelter the fire, and cans to cook in and to eat from. And the worlds were built in the evenings. The people moving in from the highways made them with their tents and their hearts and their brains. In the morning, the tents came down, the canvas was folded, the tent poles tied along the running board, the beds put in place on the carts, the pots in their places, and as the families moved westward, the technique of building up a home in the evening and tearing it down with the morning light became fixed, so that the folded tent was packed in one place, the cooking pots counted in their box. And as the cars moved westward, each member of the family grew into his proper place, grew into his duties, so that each member, old and young, had his place in the car, so that in the weary, hot evenings when the cars pulled into the camping places, each member had his duty and went into it without instruction. Children to gather wood, to carry water, men to pitch the tents and bring down the beds, women to cook the supper and to watch while the family fed. And this was done without command. The families, which had been units of which the boundaries were a house at night, a farm by day, changed their boundaries. In the long, hot light, they were silent in the cars moving slowly westward, but at night they integrated with any group they found. Thus, they changed their social life, changed as in the whole universe only man can change. They were not farm men anymore, but migrant men. And the thought, the planning, the long staring silence that had gone out to the fields went now to the roads, to the distance, to the west. That man whose mind had been bound with acres lived with narrow concrete miles. And his thought and his worry were not any more with rainfall, with wind and dust, with the thrust of the crops. Eyes watched the tires, ears listened to the clattering motors, and minds struggled with oil, with gasoline, with a thinning rubber between air and road. Then a broken gear was a tragedy. Then water in the evening was the yearning. Then food over the fire. Then health to go on was the need and strength to go on, and spirit to go on. The wills thrust westward ahead of them, and fears that had once apprehended drought or flood now lingered with anything that might stop the westward crawling. The camps became fixed, each a short day's journey from the last. And on the road, the panic overcame some of the families, so that they drove night and day, stopped to sleep in the cars, and drove on to the west, flying from the road, flying from movement. And these lusted so greatly to be settled that they set their faces into the west and drove toward it, forcing the clashing engines over the roads. But most of the families changed and grew quickly into the new life. And when the sun went down, time to look out for a place to stop. And there's some tents ahead. The car pulled off the road and stopped, and because others were there first, certain courtesies were necessary. And the man, the leader of the family, leaned from the car. "Can we pull up here and sleep?" "Why, sure, we'd be proud to have you. What state you from?" "Come all the way from Arkansas." "They's Arkansas people down that fourth tent." "That so?" "And the great question, how's the water?" "Well, she don't taste so good, but they's plenty." "Well, thank you." "No thanks to me." But the courtesies had to be. The car lumbered over the ground to the end tent and stopped. Then down from the car the weary people climbed and stretched stiff bodies. Then the new tent sprang up. The children went for water, and the older boys cut brush or wood. The fire started, and supper was put on to boil or to fry. Early comers moved over, and states were exchanged, and friends, and sometimes relatives discovered. "Oklahoma, huh? What county?" "Cherokee." "Why, I got folks there. Know the Allens? There's Allens all over Cherokee. Know the Willises?" "Why, sure." And a new unit was formed. The dusk came, but before the dark was down, the new family was of the camp. A word had been passed with every family. They were known people, good people. "I knowed the Allens all my life. Simon Allen, old Simon, had trouble with his first wife. She was part Cherokee, purty as a black colt." "Sure. And young Simon, he married a Rudolph, didn't he?" "That's what I thought. They went to live in Enid and done well, real well." "Only Allen that ever done well. Got a garage. I don't know how to say it. When the water was carried and the wood cut, the children walked shyly, cautiously among the tents, and they made elaborate acquaintanceship gestures. A boy stopped near another boy and studied a stone, picked it up, examined it closely, spat on it, and rubbed it clean and inspected it until he forced the other to demand, "What you got there?" And casually, "Nothing, just a rock." "Well, what you looking at it like that for?" "Thought I seen gold in it." "How'd you know? Gold ain't gold, it's black in a rock." "Sure, everybody knows that." "I bet it's fool's gold, and you figured it was gold." "That ain't so, 'cause Pa, he found lots of gold and he told me how to look." "How'd you like to pick up a big old piece of gold?" "Say, I get the biggest old son of piece of candy you've ever seen." "I ain't let to swear, but I do anyways." "Me too. Let's go to the spring." Sorry, not my best work there, right there. And young girls found each other and boasted shyly of their popularity and their prospects. The women worked over the fire, hurrying to get food to the stomachs of the family. Pork, if there was money and plenty. Pork and potatoes and onions. Dutch oven biscuits or cornbread, and plenty of gravy to go over it. Side meat or chops, and a can of boiled tea, black and bitter. Fried dough and drippings, if money was slim. Dough fried crisp and brown, and the drippings poured over it. Those families, which were very rich or very foolish with their money, ate canned beans, and canned peaches, and packaged bread, and bakery cake, but they ate secretly in their tents, for it would not have been good to eat such fine things openly. Even so, the children eating their fried dough smelled the warming beans and were unhappy about it. When supper was over, and the dishes dipped and wiped, the dark had come, and then the men squatted down to talk. And they talked of the land behind them. "I don't know what it's coming to," they said. "The country's spoiled. It'll come back, though, only we won't be there." "Maybe," they thought. "Maybe we sinned some way we didn't know about." "Fella says to me, government fella, and he says she's gullied up on you. Government fella. He says if you plowed across the contour, she won't gully. Never did have no chance to try her. And the new super ain't plowing across the contour. Running a furrow 4 miles long that ain't stopping or going around Jesus Christ himself." And they spoke softly of their homes. There was a little cool house under the windmill. Used to keep milk in there to cream up in watermelons. Going there midday when she was hotter than a heifer, and she just as cool as you want. Cut open a melon in there and she'd hurt your mouth. She was so cool. Water dripping down from the tank. They spoke of their tragedies. Had a brother Charlie, hair as yellow as corn, and him a growed man. Played the accordion nice too. He was a heroine one day and he went up to clear his lines. Well, a rattlesnake buzzed and them horses bolted and the harrow went over Charlie and the points dug into his guts and his stomach and they pulled his face off and God almighty. They spoke of the future. Wonder what it's like out there. Well, the pictures sure do look nice. I seen one where it's hot and fine, and walnut trees and berries, and right behind, close as a mule's booty to his withers, they's a tall up mountain covered with snow. That was a pretty thing to see. If we can get work, it'll be fine. Won't have no cold in the winter. Kids won't freeze on the way to school. I'm gonna take care of my kids, don't miss no more school. I can read real good, but it ain't no pleasure to me, like with a fella that's used to it. And perhaps a man brought out his guitar in front of his tent, hence the background music, and he sat on a box to play, and everyone in the camp moved slowly in toward him, drawn in toward him. Many men can chord a guitar, but perhaps this man was a picker. There you have something, the deep chords beating, while the melody runs on the strings like little footsteps, heavy hard fingers marching on the frets. The man played and the people moved slowly in on him until the circle was closed and tight, and then he sang 10-cent con and 40-cent meat, and the circle sang softly with him. And he sang, "Why do you cut your hair, girls?" And the circle sang. He wailed the song, "I'm leaving old Texas," that eerie song that was sung before the Spaniards came, only the words were Indian then. And now, the group welded to one thing, one unit, so that in the dark the eyes of the people were inward, and their minds played in other times, and their sadness was like rest, like sleep. He sang the McAllister Blues, and then, to make up for it, to the older people, he sang, "Jesus calls me to his side." The children drowsed with the music and went into the tents to sleep, and the singing came into their dreams. And after a while, the man with the guitar stood up and yawned. "Ugh. Good night, folks," he said, and they murmured, "Good night to you too." And each wished he could pick a guitar because it was a gracious thing. Then the people went to their beds, and the camp was quiet. And the owls coasted overhead, and the coyotes gabbled in the distance, and in the camp skunks walked, looking for bits of food, waddling, arrogant skunks, afraid of nothing. The night passed, and with the first streak of dawn, the women came out of the tents, built up the fires, and put the coffee to boil. And the men came out and talked softly in the dawn. When you cross the Colorado River, there's the desert, they say. Look out for the desert. See you don't get hung up. Take plenty water, case you get hung up. I'm gonna take her at night. Me too. She'll cut the living Jesus out of you. The families ate quickly, and the dishes were dipped and wiped. The tents came down. There was a rush to go. And when the sun arose, the camping place was vacant, only a little litter left by the people. And the camping place was ready for a new world in a new night. But along the highway, the cars of the migrant people crawled out like bugs, and the narrow concrete miles stretched ahead. Okay, that's chapter 17, and let's talk about some things that were inside of this chapter. So overall, of course, you see that there is the introduction of what's going on with the families and everything that goes on with establishing the sort of temporary communities that you need to have. Man, this was just like, it was such a lively, such a heart-filled chapter, because these are the real people, You can see one family, you can witness their hardships, and you can empathize with them. But to imagine this happening to, what'd they say, 100 people, they're camping around a fire, they're sitting together at night, they're scared out of their minds, they're worrying about what's going to come, but they have each other in that moment, and I think that's a very beautiful thing. And, there's a lot of dialogue in here, There's a lot of people talking to each other, there's a lot of, familial bonds even, and I think that there's some very interesting symbolism here as well. What struck me, I didn't really catch this on the first read through, but at the end here with the animals, maybe I feel like, into the camp skunks walked looking for bits of food, waddling arrogant skunks afraid of nothing. One thing that I thought maybe, as I was reading it just now, is maybe that represents the Okies, as they are called in later chapters, or people coming from like Oklahoma. They might be perceived by the people in California to be waddling arrogant skunks afraid of nothing. But I think, in truth, they're afraid. And, you don't go into a place without having some apprehension about it. These people, the Jodes, even, they try to not be afraid the best they can. But it's pervasive. The fear doesn't end. Come nighttime, it goes away for a little bit, but it always comes back. And you can always sense the sense of urgency. The families act quickly. They have to get on their way. Every second wasted is a second. Every second wasted, the percentage of them, not making it increases. It's a race against time. And it's interesting that they share all their tragedies. They share their dreams of the future. And it's just kind of, what's going to happen to a lot of these people. That they're going to be turned away, that it's going to be difficult, that they're going to encounter hardship and discrimination. But something about this journey really spoke to me, And let's just look through this. I think this whole idea of setting up these temporary communities for only a night, for only a few hours even. You might only talk to people for a little while. You might stay with your families, but in that moment, the universe changes. Something like that. Maybe I should have written down some of my points beforehand, but I also think that the sense of order that comes from this is very interesting as well, because each family has their own set dynamic, but when you have families come together, there develops a new dynamic, leaders and elders, and I think that this is very, very valid. A man who was wise found that his wisdom was needed in every camp. Maybe a certain escape or a certain, ex-convict was very wise and he finds himself needed in every camp. And a man who was a fool cannot change his folly with his world. Some people don't change, or don't change as much, I should say, and that just happens as well. I also like that, this idea of what goes around comes around. You make a name for yourself. If you feed a hungry person, then you ensure that you will be fed down the road as well. There's also just such sadness. If somebody's baby dies, the whole community has to pitch in. Definitely reminds me of modern equivalent, but it's like if you live in America and you have a hospital bill that is exorbitantly high and you have to have a GoFundMe or something, like that's so tragic. Man, I remember I actually saw this online, but basically there's this person who had like a stroke of some kind, and I was involved with this community a little bit, and I had like heard this person talk before, and just the fact that they had to, their entire life change, they had to go through physical therapy, they had so many bills to pay, the fact that they had to go through such a struggle, and their family members had to ask online for people to donate to a GoFundMe to cover the costs, that's just so horrible. You're just kicking someone while they're down. And these people, they're all very down, and they're very, very kicked as well. So anytime people pick each other up, that's something to celebrate. I also think that, this idea of a murderous fight or ostracism is the worst. I think this is another thing in the book that comes up like a couple times, which is you need to have your place in the world. There's this idea of direction with, Casey and Tom Joad, young Tom, and stuff like that. And that's very true. They are searching for direction. Maybe Tom values organization, but he also understands that things may change as they do in the future. Casey's searching for something to fall back on now that his life as a preacher is gone. He's kind of aimless a little bit. But this idea of having a place where you belong, I think there's something to be said there, because you see this with grandpa, with grandma. I think, honestly, it was unfair. It was unfair of them to force grandpa to come along, to basically kidnap him, because imagine that you are alive in this period of time. It's the Great Depression, the lowest point in your country's history. One of the lowest points in your country's history. Everybody's struggling, everybody's suffering. You, who have lived like 80 some years or something like that, on this land, you've worked it all your life. All you know is the land, all you know is the people on that land. And suddenly to be ripped away from that in your final days, only to be buried in a place far away, distant to your place that is so familiar to you, I think that's wrong. And I think that in the end, Grandpa knew what he wanted, and that was to be with his land, to be stubborn like a mule, but sometimes you need to be stubborn to get what you want. And I think that Grandma is also very tragic. That the chapter with her was very, very sad, and I empathize a lot with Ma as well. And I think that #Grandpa was right. Anyways, anything else to discuss here? Well, I don't know. I just think that, if you want to distill the ethos of this book, this chapter, maybe the chapter to look at, I don't know. It's a chapter about struggle. It's a chapter about family. The word family appears like 20 times in this 2 paragraphs or whatever. It's about even discussing gender roles. There's a lot of discussing gender roles, like men carrying the firewood or whatever, or children carrying the firewood, something like that. And when women preparing the food, etc. There's discussion of gender roles in here. There's discussion. I'm reiterating every point because I forgot what I just said, but gender roles, family, the journey that they're going on, the place that you call home, the rules of living in a distant place, sharing tragedy, definitely. All of these different things, they sort of coalesce into this chapter. And I think that, when I was reading this, I was like, wow. Because when you're a kid in an American school or something like that, you hear about the Oregon Trail, right? You hear about this Western migration, they took the wagons, the covered wagons and stuff, and they had like cholera or whatever, and a lot of people died. And, this is the equivalent of that. This is a different type of wagon, a station wagon maybe. And they're dying of disease, of age, of, going mad, of being too tired to go on. All these things are happening, and they're very sad, but they're very real. And, there's a real chapter in here. And I think it's valuable to study, to take a look at. And maybe, once you or I or anybody has finished this book, maybe giving chapter 17 a reread is it has some merit to it, Anyways, I just want to share this dope AF chapter in the Grapes of Wrath, and I hope you enjoyed. Maybe I will cover other works of literature at some other time. Hope my southern accent wasn't offensive. Hope it was okay. Anyways, thank you very much for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notifications. Share with your friends. ETC. Goodbye, and see you next time.